Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Ava's Webinar Wednesday series. Before we begin, I'll share a couple of procedural things. So first, throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function to pose questions to the speaker, Dr. Heslop. There is no chat function in the Zoom webinar platform, as those who have attended before, I'm sure are aware, but you can definitely pose questions in the Q&A, which will be answered at the end. And this is when we will take the time to answer questions from the audience. There will also be a survey, webinar feedback survey that we will provide at the end of the webinar. If you could please fill out, and in case you missed the QR code, which was presented at the end of the meeting, I'll follow up by email later today with a link to complete the survey and to thank you for attending. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to Ava's YouTube channel shortly, so you can revisit and share this and our previous webinars with others. And welcome to the webinar series for today. I'm your host, Jason Novick, AVA Webinar Coordinator and Research Coordinator with Dr. Letourneau's Child Studies team at the University of Calgary in the Faculty of Nursing and Department of Pediatrics. I'm joining you today from the University of Calgary, which is the ancestral territory of the Treaty 7 peoples, including the Blackfoot Confederacy, Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Métis Nation of Alberta. We are grateful to be able to work, live, and recreate in these beautiful lands. And on behalf of AVA, I want to begin by acknowledging that on a national level, we encourage all Canadians and visitors to Canada to learn about the Indigenous peoples of the lands on which they live, work, and visit, and become engaged allies together. We, as Canadians, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, respect the self-determination of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and their rights and responsibilities in cultures, languages, and the pursuit of wellness. The focus of today's webinar is recognizing risk, assessing family violence in family litigation, featuring Dr. Lisa Heslop from the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children, or CREVAWC for short, at the University of Western Ontario. Dr. Lisa Heslop is a research partner at CREVAWC. She co-leads initiatives at CREVAWC related to family violence and family law, and currently co-leads a project entitled Awareness to Action, moving from screening and assessment to developing appropriate parenting plans after family violence in the family justice system. Dr. Heslop has a doctorate degree in developmental psychology from the University of Toronto. She's the co-author of articles and book chapters related to gender-based violence and its impact, trauma and violence-informed practice, and the criminalization of persons with mental illness. She's also a consultant at Navigating Onward, the London Family Court Clinic, and a member of the clinical panel of the Office of the Children's Lawyer. Dr. Heslop, thank you so much for joining us today for your presentation, and I'll turn everything over to you now.
Thank you, and I'm just delighted to be joining you today to talk about screening, the importance of screening and assessing family violence in the context, well, actually across contexts, no matter where you sit in the system is equally important. But my focus for today is really around assessing and screening in the context of family litigation. And I'm coming to you from CREVAWC, which is a Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. We are one of, you may know, five sister alliance centers, one in British Columbia, one in Manitoba, us in Ontario, and as well as Quebec and New Brunswick. And it's really, always feel really fortunate to be able to say that I'm part of the alliance, that coalition of research centers, because it allows us to do national work on a national scale. And the project that I'm going to introduce to you today, the eSafer, is one of the piece of work that we've all co-developed and worked hard together to bring to where it is now, almost about to be launched in a couple of weeks. But I would like to start today to talk to you a little bit about screening for family violence, why we need screening tools to help us do this important work. I'm going to show you a couple of tools that you may or may not be familiar with. The MASIC-S, which is particularly developed for use for mediators, and the HELP Toolkit, which is our federal government's screening kit. And they've just done such a fantastic job. It's something we reference a lot. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to screen, and then I'll introduce you to the eSafer. So we maybe start to think about what screening is. There's sometimes people misinterpret screening as risk assessment, but they're actually two very different processes. Screening is actually the first step in having the conversation about family violence with your client. It's where we reach out and try and get a sense of what their experience have been, not necessarily what the facts of the case are or anything like that, but just stop and listen and understand from your client's perspective what their experience has been with family violence. We're not in a screening process, we're not assessing risk, although it certainly starts to identify concerns that you may have about your client's safety really early in the process, and particularly around things that need to be dealt with immediately. But all in all, it's designed that you start to have a conversation that breaks down your understanding of what's happened in their life with respect to family violence. And I've got a bit of a cold, so I'm sorry if my voice is going to sound a little scratchy. There's lots of reasons why we need to do this. And there's a sort of a debate in this field around, do we universally screen, which is, do we talk to everybody, ask the same questions to everyone that we see, versus do we only screen when people come to us and there are indicators that they may have experienced family violence? I'm a big advocate of universal screening, and you'll have no doubt about that before the end of our talk today. But there's lots of reasons. One and the first most important reason to screen is that understanding what's happening in your client's life is the very first step and the best way towards enhancing their safety, their safety and the safety of their children. There's other reasons, legislative obligations, and in fact, the eSafer, part of the reason why we developed the eSafer was in response to the changes to the Divorce Act, the federal legislation that can be used in particular contexts. And then what happened right after the Divorce Act was enacted, provinces and territories across our country worked hard to adapt the same sort of criteria around the best interests of children in the cases of family violence. This was a big deal for us. Having the courts mandated to assess the nature and severity of and frequency of the family violence, recognizing that it had an impact on children, the presence of coercive control, and how that has manifested into impacts for kids, as well as safety concerns that arise for children. It also it gave us an opportunity to really sit back and reflect on what is the best trauma and violence informed practice in order to gather the information that the courts were now mandated to ask for with respect to family violence in the best interests of the children. So that's another reason that it's important for screening. There's a legislative obligation for family law professionals to ask and find out and address those things in the context of best interests of the children criteria. Depending on where you sit, it also may inform decisions around what is the best process for your client. Is there things that you need to put in place to mitigate risk? Should you be having, for example, having people come at different times if you're assessing, or if you're a mediator, is it a process that's even relevant or safe for you to do with clients where there's been family violence and ongoing risk, especially of course of the controlling violence. It's also the first step in a risk assessment. So it's identifying those clients that you need to connect to other places in your community if doing a risk assessment and safety planning is outside of the scope of your practice. One of the things that we hear back from lawyers, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is that doing safety planning and risk assessment is outside of their scope of practice, and that's fair. And this is part of the reason why we endorse collaborative practices, no matter where you sit. This is hard work, and it shouldn't rest with one person only. So why don't we do it? Well, we hear a lot of different reasons. One of the things that we hear about is, I don't know how to do it. I'm not sure I'm skilled enough to do it, or I don't know the best way to ask these questions, or how do I even broach the subject of family violence when I'm talking to my client. And that's fair. We have worked really hard over the past, well, many, many years at CREVAWC and with our alliance partners to address some of those knowledge gaps, to provide webinars to demonstrate some of the skills and help people become more comfortable in asking those questions and dispelling sort of that myth around it's a personal, private thing and you don't want to ask. Another thing that we hear about a fair bit is that this idea that, well, my client, if I ask them about it, it may make the situation worse for them. And that's not a complete myth. Clients do appreciate, though, according to the literature, being asked about it. It allows them a chance to broach the subject without having to be the one that initiates it or provides information to their lawyer or whoever it is that they're working with in the family court system. But they're also very fearful of repercussions and what the disclosure will mean. And maybe there's been threats toward them that if they disclose, then there's going to be consequences for them. And that's really real. That's real, and it needs to be accounted for in parenting plans and the work you do throughout the whole family law process. The lack of experience in doing screening is also brought forward by many family law professionals who this is new to them and they have not typically done screening, and so they're not entirely sure how. And again, that they're not totally sure what tools are out there to help them. It's a really brave thing for survivors to disclose what's happened to them in the context of their relationships, and in particularly related to family violence. And I use the word family violence. We're gender-based violence researchers at Western, and that's more the language that we would use. But the language of the law is family violence. So that's the language that I'm going to use for the rest of the day. I should have actually clarified that sooner. But when we don't ask, survivors have difficulty. Many survivors have difficulty telling us what happened. And for a lot of reasons, really, would you, given what we know about our system and how dangerous some situations are. They might also feel embarrassed or ashamed. They might think you're not going to believe them or that you're going to judge them. They might also be really frightened that their former spouse is going to find out and that they're going to be punished for that, or there'll be repercussions for that. Former spouses who have threatened to, if they disclose the family violence, then they will go for custody of the children, or they will do something out them around something that they don't want exposed, or any number of different ways that forcibly controlling spouses can silence someone. You might also know that family violence is relevant to the family court proceedings. This isn't actually just our survivors who may not know that. I've had many conversations with lawyers in the past who say, okay, yes, this is family violence is relevant in terms of the assessment of the relationship between the parties, but it doesn't really have anything to do with parenting. He's a bad husband, but he's a really great dad. That misunderstanding is really important. And we get into that when we start talking about the e-safer. Depending on who you are and where you sit in this world, the disclosure might generate other systems coming in, child protection services or other systems that you don't want or have bad experience with, police, criminal justice systems that you are not seeing them as helpful and you would rather not they be involved. They might be afraid of losing support of their extended family members, that there's pressure from them to keep the information to themselves and not to bring in other external people to the family, and all of that entails. And for new Canadians, it might be that they don't know what the Canadian legal systems are about. These are just a few of the reasons, but we know that probably for the most at-risk survivors, the stakes are the highest. And unless you ask the questions, then you're very unlikely to hear about what's happened in their life. Having a screening tool, I think, is one of the ways that we can help start to normalize the process of asking about family violence, not only for your clients, but also for you. You could start the conversation by, saying something like, "Hey, I always ask my clients this, no matter who they are, uh, about their experience of family violence, or if there's been any violence in the relationship. When I think about violence, I think about all these different things," as a way to just normalize that for your client. They're not being targeted, and you're in a routine of asking the questions. So you develop some level of comfort with asking. If we have standardized screening tools, also, um, it it ensures that we're not relying on the information that one particular person has about family violence and its impact and relevance for family court proceedings. That is super important. Um, One of the worst ways that we can assess risk or screen for risk is based on our own professional judgment that hasn't been informed by any standardized process. This makes sure that no matter who you are and where you sit in the system, you're asking similar questions. You're asking questions that are relevant to being able to assess whether or not this person needs a more fulsome risk assessment or some things need to happen at that very moment to keep them safe. I'm going to show you a couple of tools just shortly. But how you ask, what questions you ask, how you ask them is just as important. And it needs to be done in this process where you have established some rapport and level of comfort with your client. You've created a safe space in your office. You've set aside some time. You understand the impacts and you can interpret your client's presentation through that lens, that you know that trauma and the impacts of family violence may make it difficult for your client to fully participate in legal processes. But you're not judging and you're not misinterpreting that as them being disinterested or disorganized or whatever other negative attributions you might have. I think the other piece is that you are clear about all of the overlapping identities that people bring to this and how each one of those things and cumulatively they create barriers to accessing the legal system. These are really important considerations on that side, but also a lot of those overlapping identities can be used as forms of coercive control. And knowing about this up front and also understanding your client's perspective from it is really going to go a long way to being able to create an environment where the disclosure is most likely to happen. Other things you want to consider is when you're doing screening or you're doing assessment, it takes a lot of time. It takes as much time as it takes. So having set aside enough time to be able to have that conversation is important. You can't do this when you're 10 minutes at the end of a meeting or you're doing it off the side of your desk. It really does need an important piece of time set aside to be able to talk about what's happening in your client's life. And don't expect, of course, that your client is going to give you all that information immediately. And sometimes they won't give it to you at all. But make sure that you're not just asking once, especially in the context of family litigation, because things change so quickly. We know that separation is a particularly high risk time for survivors and children. And family litigation layered on top of that is especially dangerous because it's a high stakes endeavor. Decisions are being made about how much time you have to spend with your children, how assets are going to be divided, who is going to remain in the marital home, all those kinds of things. People start dating maybe looking for a new partner, and all of those things can be times of really significant danger. So one thing I would say about screening is that it isn't a one-time thing. you've got to continue to come back and back and back, check in with your client, ask similar questions, the same, follow up on things that they've disclosed, and ask about how things are going in order that you can keep things, you can keep yourself apprised of what's happening. If you have concerns about your client, based on what they've shared, share that with them in the interview. Yeah. That needs to be addressed right away at the interview time. If there's things that need to be done to mitigate risk, be prepared to have things ready, have resources that you can connect that person to, maybe an advocate, a counselor, someone who can do a more fulsome safety plan. And maybe not, maybe you don't just hand them a card. You do a warm handoff so that if that person is in some danger, that you're making sure that that connection has been made, and it's not all on the survivor who's juggling a lot of other things to be able to go forth and find an appointment. I'm going to just tell you about a couple of tools. The MASIC S is a screening tool that is designed. I don't know if anyone's watching that is doing mediation work or parent coordination work, but it's designed specifically for that context. It has 20 weighted items, and it screens for coercive control, physical and sexual abuse, stalking and harassment, severity of the abuse, and the level of fear that survivors have. And if I encourage you to go and take a look at it if that's the context that you're working in. And the benchmark for mediation would be less than 3 factors that have been endorsed. The other tool that I think is a really amazing one is the Help Toolkit. And this is our federal government's Department of Justice kit that they've taken a lot of care and a lot of time, consulted with a lot of people, experts in the field, to develop this framework for screening in the context of family law. And if you have not had a chance to look at it, I strongly encourage you to. Not only is the framework really helpful, but the supplementary materials are really, really well done. It's just in the stages of being updated, but it's just a very good resource. And we leaned on it heavily when we developed the eSafer. Essentially what it does, it encourages you to have a conversation, to start the conversation. And there's language provided in the guide about how to do that, how to ask that question, how to broach that subject. And then the next step is to explore any immediate risks and safety concerns. And again, there's lots of guidance provided in the toolkit about how to do that, where to find resources, how to establish collaborative relationships within communities. And then the learning more about family violence to help you determine how it is that you're going to manage the case. What are the things that you're going to recommend? What are the parenting plan pieces that are going to help mitigate risk? And we think about this in terms of building guardrails around certain things so that we keep the children and the survivor parent safer. And then finally, promoting safety through the family law case. That could mean many, many different things. It could mean that you're making sure that there's a safe place for them to wait in the courthouse, that they're not going to be in contact with the partner that was abusive. It might mean that you have an advocate there, all sorts of different ways that you can promote safety throughout the case. And the Help Toolkit does a really good job of breaking those down. It's a very good resource. So the eSafer, this is our new tool, and we're really proud of it. We have taken a long time. It's taken about almost 4 years in the development. We've worked coast to coast with professionals who have informed the guide, and it also built on some foundational work from other tools, one being the SAFER, which was developed by the Battered Women's Justice Project. And they just did such a fantastic job in pulling all of this information together and constructing a way to help you move through the family law system. It's a great tool. It's a paper and pencil tool. So our objective was to make something that could be completed online. and that was relevant to the Canadian context and also to the Canadian legislation. After the amendments to the Divorce Act, there was some really good case law that came out. Barondret and Grebelunia, I can never say that very well, into 2022. Super important case law, because what it did was it said, it established it very clearly that family violence impacts children's development. This is part of the impact that you need to explore if you're doing this assessment work. That it's equal to poor parenting. So trying to debunk and dispel this notion that you can be a great partner, or you can be a really bad and abusive partner and a great parent at the same time, that those things don't coexist, that violence can extend beyond and or even begin post separation. And we know that family violence doesn't end at the point of separation for many survivors. In fact, it gets worse. And it looks differently as the access to that person is changed. So what you may see is litigation abuse or vexatious litigation, where the person is being bombarded with motion after motion after motion after motion, in an attempt to exhaust them emotionally, as well as deplete their finances. It's a particular strategy. Or the children may become more involved in the family violence as used as spies or in other ways. So in no way should we make an assumption that because the parties have separated, there's safety and the family violence will end. That's not the case for many people. And that another important finding in this particular particular decision was that the children don't need to witness the event, the violence, to be impacted. We have many really interesting cases that we've highlighted, case law, and I encourage you to take a look at those. They're on the Family Violence Family Law website at CREVAWC, and they have been contributed. There's contributions that have been made to that library across our country by our alliance partners, who have highlighted pieces of decisions rather that are relevant for different parts of our country. So I'm going to show you the guide, but I just want to tell you the areas that you're going to assess when you go in the guide. First is the current parenting relationship. And here what you're going to want to do is look at how they communicate. Are the parents communicating? Are they able to make decisions together? What's the history around all that? Do they feel safe and comfortable talking with the other party? And then you're going to look at the nature, severity, and frequency of the family violence and when it occurred. These are exactly the best interest criteria of the federal legislation, the Divorce Act, and many of the different provincial and territorial pieces of legislation. Is there the presence of coercive control? And we offer a framework in the guide to help you conceptualize and describe coercive control. And what is the child's experience of family violence? Are there any compromises that you're concerned about for the safety of the children? Are there any parenting concerns by the parent who used the abusive behavior? And the impact on not only the survivor parent, but the children, including, are the children afraid, and is the survivor parent afraid? And then, we hope for change, but we need to assess it. And it's not just good enough to say, I went to a program, therefore everything is good. We want to see some signs of change, and we help you to assess what some of the indicators of change might look like as you're creating your parenting plan. And then any other relevant circumstances. This category, we took a lot of time in pulling apart, and I'll show it to you in just a minute, because really what we're looking at here is intersectional issues that need special consideration for a particular family, for a particular individual. It's available in both our official languages. We have built the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee top 20 factors into the guide as a way to track dynamic risk while you're engaged in this work. And in each of those sections, we offer language around how to ask the questions and how to ask follow-up questions in all the sections. And we also have help sections in the guide, including literature summaries, case law links, resources, and videos, which are going to be coming soon. And then we have checklists, and those checklists and summaries of your concerns then animate to the provincial or territorial legislation best interest criteria. It was a long, complicated way to say it, to the best interest criteria of all of the legislation, that whichever one you choose, the best interest, it will be there, and I'll show it to you. So how do you access it? Well, for the next month, we're going to just leave it open so that you can go in and check it out. I will send you the link to the eSafer. You can find it on our website, and then we're going to close it because we're going to password protect it. It's never going to be, there's never going to be a cost associated. It's always going to be free. And for the next, hopefully, while, cross our fingers, we'll also be doing training free of charge across the country. So there's training opportunities that we're going to post. And we're also going to have a short quiz and a video, training video that's embedded into the guide. And then you'll answer a short quiz. And once it's completed, then you'll be able to set your own password. We do not store any information on our website. This is really important if you're going to play with it. The only, I'll maybe just show you instead. But here's where you go to our Family Violence, Family Law website. And you'll see we have the eSafer tab here. Click on that, and then you can visit. It's locked. It says it's locked, but it won't be for the next month. So you can play. So let me show it to you. Uh-oh. Can you see it? Can you see? I'm going to stop sharing for a second because I need to maybe do it a little bit differently. Okay, can you see now? Somebody put their thumb up. I'm going to assume you can. Okay, great, thank you. So when you come into the eSafer, you'll see this. It's a welcome to the site, and you'll either start a new document or you can import an existing document. So we don't expect that you're going to be able to get through a full assessment in one go. You might have to do it over the course of a couple of interviews with your client, and that's fine. But again, I just want to really emphasize, we don't store the information. It was a decision that was made early in the development that we didn't think Western should keep your information that is this sensitive. So you need to make sure that you save it on your own system. So you'll press the enter, and this is what it will look like across all the sections. I really hope that you'll take some time. We don't have time to go through it all here, but take some time to look at it. You'll see the opening questions. You'll have place to put information about the children. You can add children using this bar here, this little button here. You'll see on the side here, the sidebar, these are the DVDRC, factors. You can check off them as they come up. No matter where they are, those DVDRC factors stay within your line of vision. We also have a button here that's called safety planning, and there's tips and links to resources about safety planning, developing a safety plan, making sure that it's relevant in wherever you are in the country. You can move between the tabs either by clicking on this menu here, or you can proceed to the next section right here. The other thing I just draw your attention to is that you have an opportunity to put notes in. So if you're doing an interview, you can just type away your notes as you would anywhere on a laptop or however that works. And those notes will print out in a document at the end. I'm not going to go through them all because I see the time, but I do want to talk about this just a little bit. This is a really important section, and that has been designed to get us better understanding the social location and intersecting vulnerabilities in some cases, as well as strengths of our clients. So here you're going to canvas things around culture, religion, identity, immigration, migration, pre-migration, um, living in a remote or isolated area, adequacy of their resources. Do they have shelter, food, all of that? If there's anything about their physical or mental health that makes their life more challenging, or substance use, or other things. And you can check those off as you go, as it comes up. This keeps present in your mind at all times that these are things that need to be considered when you're developing a parenting plan. You're going to look at the current parenting relationship. And here, starting from here, you're going to have these summary boxes. And the summary boxes just identify where your concerns are in this particular case. So let's say we have lots of concerns in the parenting relation regarding the parenting relationship. Abusive relationships, you're starting to see that there's subcategories. And when you click on any one of those boxes, up will come examples of those things that you might be listening for or providing as examples for your client. And then you're going to rate your concerns in each of those boxes. And if you click on the summary box, you'll also come up a section of information that tells you what section does this align with in your best interest criteria based on the Divorce Act. And why is it important to consider? The area of coercive control, you'll see here on my screen, I hope you can see this. As you move between screens, the eSafer automatically saves to your download file. That's important. But there is a secondary way that you can do that by pressing the download progress button. So if you're going to leave the site, you'd want to make sure that you've downloaded your progress and then you're going to save it it's a JSON file. Don't change that. Don't change it to a different format. Children's experience of violence. We're talking about children who have been used as a tool of family violence, or just that abusive disregard for the child's experience of family violence that reaches, that disregard that reaches the threshold of being abusive. Whether you have concerns about the children, and you rate the children separately here about their emotional, physical, sexual development, as well as neglect. Concerns that you have about the parent's parenting, so on all of the areas, impact on each of the children. And then this is the section that I'd mentioned that where we're giving you some ideas about how to assess change, not just a participation in something, but actual change, both in protective behaviors as well as accountability behaviors. And then here's where the magic happens. I still get a kick out of this. When you go to your summary page, you're going to select the piece of legislation that you want to use. And let's say you choose the Divorce Act, but there's a drop-down menu. You can use all different kinds of legislation. And what happens is it prints out all of that information and animates it to the section that it's related to. So the ability and willingness of any person who engaged in family violence to care for and meet needs of the children, the areas that you've assessed around parenting, economic insecurity, disruption of everyday life instability, not separating their needs, the children's needs from their own, and interference with parenting come up there. And so on. The appropriateness of making an order that would require persons in respect to whom the order would apply to cooperate. Here you come up with, there's lots of concerns around the parenting relationship. And each of those factors then pulls out all of the areas where you have concerns and that need to be accounted for in your parenting plan. Cool, eh? And then when you download the summary, this prints out in a format such that you can cut and paste. So you can put your notes, and all of your notes come out in a Word format. So you've got full capability of editing. I'm 2 minutes over where I should be, and I'll stop sharing. And I think we have questions. Do we have questions?
Thank you so much for your excellent webinar presentation, Dr.
My
Heslop, and I'm
pleasure.
very appreciative of your efforts towards creating the eSafer app, sharing the importance of this resource, along with the contextual background work that you've undertaken. So this is just a reminder to everyone just to please ask your questions with the Q&A function. And accordingly, I my first question is I'm wondering, how does the eSafer tool support practitioners in situations where family violence is subtle or primarily involves coercive control rather than physical
Mm,
abuse?
yeah, great question. One of the things that we took good care in was being thorough in canvassing all the different sections of family violence. And we've had fantastic feedback from assessors, people who are doing um, I, I know everybody's different across our country. We have different language for things, but those people who are doing parenting assessments, be they clinicians or psychologists, um, they really like that it's thorough and it goes through all of those different kinds of ways that um, family violence can manifest. And I really do like our way of conceptualizing coercive control. It was borrowed from well, it's right out of the legislation, and it came from the model code in the US. It's a very good way to construct it based on those three dimensions of coercive control, whether, that it was a pattern of behavior that compelled compliance through the use of violence or threats. So it helps you actually break it down in a way that I think has been really helpful in writing up parenting assessments.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for explaining how coercive control was conceptualized for the eSafer app. I'm also interested in integrating a question related to parenting. And specifically, I'm wondering, what guidance would you offer for balancing child safety with maintaining parental relationships when developing parenting plans and family violence cases?
You know that we put survivors in an awkward spot, in an impossible spot sometimes, when we expect that they are going to cooperate, or their protective behaviors are misinterpreted or misconstrued as alienating, or attempts to keep the children away from the parent who used family violence. This is a big problem. And if you don't do a good assessment, these are the cases that are the very high risk cases that need to be. You need a fulsome assessment of what's happening, or someone's protective behaviors can easily be misinterpreted as alienating. There's been a lot of debate on this subject, and I don't think you can have, well, we won't go too far down that road. We don't have time, but yeah, it's a very delicate balance. I think Janet Johnson did some really great work in old from a way back. It's great work because it was simple. And what she said is, if you can't meet all of the competing priorities in your case, then the first priority has to be the safety of the children, number one. Number two, the safety and support for the well-being of the survivor parent. And then you go down, and there's five competing priorities. And maybe you start off with wanting to achieve all of those priorities: time with both parents, making sure everyone is getting some time and it's good and positive time. That's all good, but if you cannot pull it apart in a way that you get all of those competing priorities, then the number one thing is you focus on the safety of the children. And that's just a bit of clarity, in terms of why we do this work.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for elucidating the importance of child well-being and the maintenance of parental relationships and the importance of prioritizing the safety and well-being of children and those who have experienced intimate partner violence. I'm also wondering, in accordance with an audience question from Ken Hawkins, can you mention how family pets are sometimes used in coercive control, and is there any evidence
Mhm.
in approaching this subject?
Coercive control is a highly individualized thing. So, what works to control one survivor doesn't maybe work for another. The vulnerabilities of one survivor will not maybe be the vulnerabilities of another. And so, to think about coercive control just in terms of violence is a really big mistake. It could be that I am, uh, I love my pet so much, and I do honestly. I'm a pet person. I have two really cute dogs. Oh my gosh, they're so sweet. And I can't even imagine someone harming them. It would be a great way to control. When we think about coercive control, I really want to emphasize that anything that is important to that person, be it to a pet or whatever in that person's life, whatever vulnerability that they may have, um, that can be very well used as a means of coercive control, both pre and post separation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for answering this audience inquiry pertaining to the unfortunate and disturbing integration of coercive control and abusive behaviors against pets within the realm of intimate partner violence. And the final
Mhm.
question I have, unless there are further audience questions that emerge, is that in your experience, what is the most important shift legal professionals need to make to move from basic
Mhm.
screening to more meaningful, safety-focused assessments?
Mm. I mean, I'd just be really happy if everybody started with screening. That's the first step. The e-safer, our goal with creating the e-safer was to make it as easy as possible, easier to use it than not to use it. We tried to keep it as simple as we can and pulling apart very complex cases and concepts. I think time will tell whether we've done a good job in that or not. But um, lawyers can't do it all. They need this needs work needs to be done collaboratively. And some legal clinics are doing really innovative things around this right now and across our country, where they have a collaborative model where the social worker and a lawyer work together. And it's the vulnerability of their clients really dictate that that's the very best thing that they could be doing for those clients. And if you don't work in that context, most people don't, still there's resources that you can partner with to make sure that you're not doing this work alone. Some of the most remote places in our country, I've done parenting assessments in some of them, and they come up with some incredibly creative safety plans that wrap around survivors to help keep them safe. So if it's down to one thing that I would like to see is an openness towards collaboration, collaborative law practices, um, the use of advocates, the use of social workers to support people as they go forward in the system.
Absolutely, and thank you for synthesizing the information from your presentation and providing these summative recommendations for how legal professionals can best undertake a shift towards more meaningful safety focused assessments and for sharing your important work through the development of the Safer app, which will soon be available. So, on behalf of the Alliance Against Violence and Adversity, I'd like to thank you for your valuable webinar presentation today. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And please, I will send the link to the feedback survey after the webinar. And thank you so much for attending. And thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Heslop.
It's been my pleasure. And would you send the link to the eSafer for people as well?
Absolutely. Yes, I will.
That's great. Thank you and all the best. Thanks for having me on your webcast.